Welcome to the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage, where rude mechanicals do magic. Hello, I'm Bronze Age, Director of the Secret Underground Laboratory Recovery and Salvage. Today we have a wobbly, rickety little table here. This table dates back to the late 70s, early 80s. Somewhere down underneath it there's a label that says Made in Finland, which means that it was shipped in a flat box, and furniture that like that is made to be assembled by the end buyer usually comes out a little rickety after a couple of decades of heavy use. In this case, this table was left in a non-climate controlled storage where it was exposed to the moisture, the humidity, and the top here had split and come apart. So that's the biggest part of our problem. Beyond that, we have quite a bit of bug damage. These holes are created by powder post beetles. They're a little tiny moth, fly, some kind of little creature like that. Lays eggs on bare wood. When the larva hatches out, it starts eating its way into the boards. And eventually it will emerge as another powder post beetle. They're very hard to get rid of if you get infested with them, because they live down these little holes, and most of your common pesticides, household stuff, simply just doesn't get to them. I've had to clean up worse jobs than this, and it is a real pain, sometimes taking months before you get the whole thing done. As I said before, it's a flat pack. So 2 bolts here, 2 bolts here, and this thing would fold down into a big wide box, but easy enough for somebody to get home in the back seat of their car or the trunk or something like that. IKEA is not a brand new idea. It's been around for probably more than 100 years or so. I'm going to have to try and get the bow out of this piece before I start gluing it back together. Worst comes to worst, I can always plane the bow out of it, but I'd rather get it straight and save most of the wood. When people see this clamp, they always ask me, why on earth do you need a clamp that big? And generally, I don't know. But I do know that if I didn't have it, whenever I do need one, I'd have to find some other way to do it. What I'm going to do is draw this thing down past the bow point to allow for the spring back, and let it sit overnight, and maybe a day or two. If I have to, I may have to steam it, but it's such a slight bend, I think that if I let it sit like this for a day or two, it'll come back out nice and flat. So we'll just have to wait and see. Well, we've gone from about 7/16 to less than an eighth. That's progress. There's a split right here that is sort of a dilemma. The glue at the other end is pretty tight and solid, and I don't think it's going to pop loose, but I want to secure this piece. It's got a lot of dirt and grime in here. I cleaned it out as well as I could with a hacksaw blade. And what I want to do is be able to draw this in tight and flat. And to relieve a little bit on the bottom side, maybe bring the top side in for a tighter joint, I'm going to cut a little bit of the wood on the bottom side of the kerf away. but being careful not to break through to the top side because I want to keep that gap as small as possible. I got two problems here. Not only is this split open about a 1/16 of an inch here, one side is actually higher than the other. So I always carefully dry fit the clamps first before I start mixing up the epoxy. Because once this epoxy is mixed, and it's quick setting epoxy, you don't have a lot of time to work with it. So I don't want any surprises. Finding something doesn't line up like I thought it was going to. Now I've got a piece of 1-inch square oak, pretty stiff, that I'm going to use with C-clamps to draw it back down flat again. Feeling underneath and on top here, this is the bottom side. I think that's going to work. So, get it all back apart, and we start committing ourselves to a long-term relationship. One last step is to drill a row of holes in the seam. They go about 3/4 of the way through, and this will just be a channel for epoxy so I can get good even distribution all the way down the crack. For this glue up, I'm going to use regular wood glue. A couple reasons. One is I need the extra setup time, and don't have any epoxy that won't set up faster than I can put the clamps together. I'm not really going to worry about the glue squeeze out because this whole top is going to be cut down probably a 1/16 of an inch or more, getting rid of these stains. Well, that looks like a pretty nice joint right there. If I can get another one on this piece, then we'll have a table that's put back together. The next step, joining the two pieces of the table together, is going to call for some real secret underground laboratory resourcefulness, or as I usually call it, poor boy's Christmas technology. Got a piece of 1x4 pine that's salvaged from a crate, and a piece of angle iron that's salvaged from a bed frame. Now the goal here is to get these two pieces of table in the same plane, even though they both have a twist, and they twist in the opposite direction. All of this is in preparation for what I call curfing in, which is an old technique used when you need to join two pieces of board together and you don't have a joiner, at least not one with a motor attached to it. Now we have our Poor Boy's Christmas saw guide, which is a 4-foot Stanley level, and a couple of clamps. I set the saw guide level on the piece that has basically the straightest edge. And the idea here, since it's curving in, is to saw a piece off of both sides until both sides are parallel. It's probably going to take 2 passes because there is a pretty big bow in this piece on this side. For the final curving in, I'm going to screw this piece of oak block down to the both sides to try and reduce this mismatch right here, because when I'm going across it tends to tilt the saw table a little bit. And I really want to get as square a cut as possible on this. And the washers are there to try and eliminate any kind of error from spring back. And that looks pretty close. I loosened that block of oak underneath so I can see and that looks like a nice tight fit. Get this pulled back down again and should make a very satisfactory glue joint and hold this table together. Now this is the part where the guy usually says, and now without further ado. In this case it's now with much more ado. We're not really even at the halfway point yet. But it is time to start trying to put it all back together. Well, I think this is going to come out pretty nice. But as Meatloaf said, let me sleep on it. I'll give you an answer in the morning. Now the goal here is to return this top back to the customer roughly in the condition in which she bought it back in 1980 or so. And what we have here is weather damage, we've got insect damage, and we've got storage damage where it looks like somebody put flower pots or something on it. Who knows? That's the kind of stuff that happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the flower pot damage, because that appears to be dirt that didn't come off when I scrubbed this thing at the car wash. And then we'll look at the rest of it and see how we're going to address that. Now before everybody starts screaming, Stanley number 80 scraper, that's not a knife number 80 scraper blade. This is obviously a piece of steel that's been cut from an old saw. Probably a shame to do that to a saw, but for a varnish scraper, it seems to be doing pretty good. Okay, that is as much sanding as I'm going to do. That's the last pass with 220. And these kind of slab top tables, where it's made up from a bunch of boards, they're kind of like those big bags of chips that are filled with all the little bags of chips. Most of them you like. There's always going to be one or two that you don't really care for. So in this case, we've got a few knot holes, a few bad spots, a couple places where the grain reversed, not to mention all the stains that have gone too deep to remove. And all of that stuff's just going to have to stay there. I put the wood filler in all the bug holes and any of the seams that couldn't be closed up, because this is not a dining room table. This is a work table. The size of the trestle that goes underneath it is it's not really a place for two people to sit down, certainly not four people to sit down and eat. This is more of a desk than a table. So my goal here is to get the top very smooth and nice and hard so it can stand up to use as a desk again. This video is running way over time, so I'm going to cut it off now. Once the top was smooth, I wrestled the trestle onto the Sterling Packard drill press and clamped it down straight and square so I could drill a 3/4 hole through the leg and into the stretcher to hold an oak dowel. This joint is the weak point in modern trestle design tables. A traditional trestle table would have a mortise and tenon joint with the tenon going through the leg and held with a wedge. This is called a tusk tenon joint, but you need a pretty thick stretcher to make it. On this table, there's not enough wood, so it's held with a butt joint and 2 screws. There's just too much leverage when someone leans on the table. A couple of screws are never going to hold. 2 screws and a thick dowel should hold it together, and if this table is not exposed to the weather again, it should last another 40 years or so. This is Bronze Age for the Secret Underground Laboratory, and I thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. I appreciate any comments, and if you have questions about what we do here in the lab, I'm happy to answer.